You're listening to the Minutes on Growth podcast, the show that brings you mindfully curated insights into relationships, spirituality, personal development, and everything in between, with your host, Tannaz Hosseinpour. Hi, everyone. It's Tannaz Hosseinpour, and welcome back to another episode of Minutes on Growth. Today, we have the lovely Faswilla Sampson with us, certified coach and author. Welcome.
Hello, Tannaz. I'm happy to be here, especially on a podcast about personal development, relationships, and mindset. So this is my jam. Thank you. I look forward to a good conversation today.
Thank you for being on. Let's dive right in because you have wealth of knowledge to share with us. I definitely want to take as much as we can. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up being here right now, doing what you're doing?
So my background is really a vice president of operations, working in the nonprofit sector in Washington, D.C. But in the last few years, I've been specializing in personal leadership and organizational development, working primarily with the executive, supervisory, and managerial positions in small to medium-sized companies. So as you alluded to, I haven't always been in this line of work. So how I got into sort of coaching and leadership is kind of interesting. Several years ago, I was feeling really underwhelmed and unfulfilled in my job. And I don't know if your listeners can relate to that, or maybe even yourself. Yeah. And other areas of my life were okay. I had just got out of a divorce and, I was finding myself again and doing the things that I liked and really discovering myself. And so other areas were fine, but I knew that I just wanted more out of life, right? And there had to be more. And I just didn't know how to get or step into my potential and what that looked like. And a word that I use that you're probably familiar with is like get into my flow, right? Mm-hmm. Find that flow and align with my desires. I had no clue on how to do that. So one day, my father actually suggested to me, well, why don't you enroll in this leadership program that he was enrolling in? And I was like, okay, fine, sure. Mainly because I wasn't really convinced on how that is going to help me, again, get into my flow, find my alignment. But I kept an open mind really to the process. And as they say, trust the process, right? And it's been a wonderful decision for me. And really, it was a turning point for me, mainly because that was the first time that I had set a specific goal, took action on it, and then got the exact intended outcome that I was seeking. And obviously, I have accomplished things previous to that, right? There's something about that whole process that it just made me go, no, it can't be this easy. So really, what I think was different about that and learning that process was mindset. It was viewing things that weren't, or that were primarily out of my control, right? And so that these things that are just happening to me versus looking at things that are in my control and that how I can affect my results. And I often share with the people that I work with, it's about moving from feeling powerless, right, in your situation, to being empowered to really accomplish things that are really important enough for you to do. And so you mentioned success. Really, for me, success in that case isn't about the end result or the destination, what you have in front of you, but it's really about that journey and everything that came really before that outcome happened.
Wow, I love it. There were so many beautiful things that you said. It just, that short amount. You said it was the first time that you set an intention, you took inspired action, and you got the intended result. So effort, willingness, action led to result.
And being deliberate about it. And I think what I've seen, and I mean, I know this, right? I've had what I say before this awakening is that my life was completely different. When I look back at it, I was like, how was I living before? And the thing that stuck with me is that once you sort of learn this, it's really hard to unlearn this, right? And there's just a lot of us walking around the earth, letting things happen to us and not truly seeing and appreciating how us being deliberate with our actions, with our thoughts and our behaviors and our attitudes, especially towards ourselves, affects everything.
Wow. Do you think when your father suggested that you enroll in the leadership program, do you think that perhaps the reason he brought it up at that moment was because you were ready to reach that next level of awareness that would nudge you towards the next step?
That's a really great question. And mainly because my father is he's a very spiritual guy. And part of me wants to say, yeah, he knew because he knew me, right? I was a daughter. But I think he's also just saying, like, hey, I don't really know how to help, but I'm doing something. And so if you're open to it, do you want to come along? And I know he's a trusted source, right? And so I think there's a little bit of both. I kind of say I don't believe in consequences. Not consequences, excuse me. What's the word I'm looking for?
Coincidence.
Co- exactly. Thank you. I don't believe in coincidences. That I think for whatever reason, the universe had just lined up in that moment that I really needed something, but I was willing to go after it. I just didn't know how. And then swoop in, here's an answer for you. And it doesn't really come in the form that you're thinking to take it. But those are the universe's signs saying to you, no, go ahead, go do it. So
I love that. I love that you said it's not usually the way you think it is. And I think the beauty of your story is your openness and your willingness to try new things. And oftentimes we think things should always be a certain way, and that's how we want it to be. So we
right,
focus so much on that door, and we like fail to see all the other opportunities, either because we've been socially conditioned, or we think our way is the better way always. And then the
right.
universe surprises us. That's such a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing. In this path of studying leadership, what do you think leadership is now? Like when you're teaching leadership, what does it mean? Are leaders born, or do you become a leader?
That's the age-old question, isn't it? It's a billion-dollar question. I'm going to say this. You may want a nice, neat definition of leadership, but leadership is individual. It's an authentic to each and every one of us, and it's really comes out of our values, right? And our willingness to have people and support them in a way that supports a much larger vision. And so that is going to be different for everyone. I thought a lot of leadership in the beginning, especially at work, because it's hierarchical and all that. You're thinking, oh, it's a title. It's somebody here. And over the years and becoming a practitioner, what I realized is that no, that's not. There could be somebody who's working, has no title, and they have followers. They have people that are willing to listen to them, who they give advice to, and they take it. That to me, if you look around the room, who has sort of the most people around them and who has people that they can say that they have a trail that they've helped, that's a leader. And so it comes in different sort of shapes and sizes and forms. And I often say that you need to lead from where you are. So in the work context, it doesn't matter if you're a certain title or not. And I respect everybody the same equally. And I want you to see yourself as a leader. You don't do leadership when you get to a certain position. You do leadership now, and that propels you to go further in your life.
I love that. That you do leadership now and not at a certain position. Like
Yeah.
some people think, when I get there, when I become that, I'll start to act differently, talk differently, walk differently.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of embodying it right now
Yeah.
and being that which you want to be. For a leader, what values do leaders tend to have that makes them a leader? Like what differentiates a leader and a manager?
Ooh, that's a very good question. So a manager, just a quick and dirty definition, is just they're managing a process, right? There's time, they're managing people, they're managing resources. A leadership is really about inspiring people and empowering people. And so you've got to come at it from a completely different angle, and you have to really want to get to know and understand people. really as especially kind of going back to that work context as a total person, right? Managers aren't really concerned with their employees as total people. They're more just, okay, this is Bob and he works here. This is Sue and she works in this position and she just needs to, this is her role and these are her responsibilities. I just need to make sure that they get those done. A leader comes in and says, hey, Bob and Sue, what are some of your personal goals? What are the things that you'd like to achieve in your life? And, how can I help you do that? And takes interest in them. And again, that's if you're sort of like, well, how do I know if somebody's a leader or not? That's the difference that you can see sort of in real time between a leader. So I hope that answered your question of the difference between management and leadership.
So not all managers are leaders and not all leaders are managers.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned leaders inspire people, and you recently published a book, The Leadership Development Toolkit, Redesigning Your Leadership Development Template to Drive Individual and Organizational Change. What is the book about, and what inspired the book?
So what really inspired the book, kind of going back to my earlier story, I realized a light bulb kind of went off and I said, I'm probably not the only one kind of feeling like this. So I made the investment in myself, but really, I said, well, what if businesses at the jump started making this kind of investment in their people? And that's why, we sort of decided to write the book, if you will, on that. And so the book really establishes that the importance of having a leadership development program, and that if you do that, you're going to get benefits that it both are tangible and intangible. So whatever you think as an employer, the investment, let's invest people, you have a return on investment, not only in your organization, but in those people wanting to stay with you and wanting to be evangelists, if you will, for the business.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about the shift in mindset that the corporate world has experienced. Let's go back a decade or even 15 years. It was more common to hear people saying, well, if I invest in my employees and I get them to become the best version of themselves, well, they'll just leave and start their own business. And, they'll be so empowered that they'll be like, why am I working here? I can do it for myself. And now we're seeing these big corporations invest in sending their employees to retreats, to one-on-one coaching. And why do you think this shift took place? What did the previous generation of business not see?
I'd like to say that is completely out the window. There's still some people, unfortunately, who have titles and responsibilities in organizations and businesses that still think like that, unfortunately. And, I will say that with the pandemic, I think that there's been a trend now to focus more on employees, especially seeing them as a total person. And given everything that's going on, even somewhat post-pandemic work-life reality, if we will, putting employees at sort of the center at work is something that I'm hopeful and optimistic that continues. Because, to my earlier point, you're going to get more employee satisfaction, more customer satisfaction. Just think about if I'm working in ABC company and nobody sort of cares about me, I'm kind of left to my own devices. Nobody's taking an interest in me and trying to develop me. I'm disengaged at work or actively disengaged. I don't care about that company at that point. So for a business to say that, it's counterintuitive. And also it's the difference between having an abundance mindset, okay, and a deficit mindset, or a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And unfortunately, like I said, you have individuals who hold those positions who still are sort of rooted in sort of deficit mindset. For me, that's not the sign of a leader. There's enough to go around, right? And so just think about anything. You plant a flower, a tree, you water it, you fertilize it, you take care of it, it grows. People are no different than that. And so to say, well, if I do that, then somebody's going to come and want to buy that flower. What's the point? I think it's a weak argument that doesn't really see the full picture.
I love that. I love that you brought in growth mindset and fixed mindset. And to be honest, I did not expect that answer, but that was such a beautiful shift in perspective of, okay, if I'm fearing my employees becoming their best selves and leaving, then there is something wrong. The way I'm looking at the world and the economy is through the lens of scarcity and not of abundance. Yeah. So,
and I feel like that would trickle down in if you go into an organization like that, you'll see evidence of that in other things too. So yeah, absolutely.
wow.
So I'm hopeful. Just like my story earlier, I was going through some things personally. So you have well, I'll say this, out of adversity, there's opportunity for people to use that as a turning point to really get into alignment and start to experience more of what they want out of life. And I think the pandemic really is no different than that.
I definitely agree. I think a candle can only be a candle in a room that's dark. So the light always comes in the moments that we're perceiving as challenges and as dark moments. That said, if you could go back to the version of you that was feeling unfulfilled and to the version of you before your father who suggested the course, if you could give one piece of advice, what would it be?
You know, what I've learned oftentimes is how we view things is so important. Going back to that abundance, deficit, fixed growth mindset. And I'm happy to say that even my kids are learning that in school, which I'm just like, oh my God, I love this. That you're teaching them at such a young age, that I think what stood in my way a lot of the time was how I saw myself based on how I had been conditioned and, all the other societal conditionings, who you grew up with, what people said about you, and allowed those to really limit me. So it's almost as if I've kept myself here and there's a ceiling. And that's as far as I thought mentally that I could go, was only here. When in reality, it was like, well, let's start to uncover and unpack that. And then you realize, whoop, sunroof's back, sky's fully there. Like there's no limit to where you can go. So that'd probably be my advice is, what are the things you're telling yourself? What are the attitudes that you have that are leading to the behaviors and the actions that you're taking?
So the only limit are the limits that you place on yourself. So,
yeah.
And we're not even conscious of them for the most part until something happens. And then we go within and we're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense now. But when you're living it, you don't really know that you're living it.
Yeah. And we have a tendency to look at other people and go, oh, they just have more money than me and they're prettier. They just have a better life. That may be true, but they could also have those things that you say you want because they have no limits on themselves. Yeah. So yeah, we limit ourselves a lot of the time.
Yeah, so true. I love all that you've shared. And as someone who is an expert in leadership, what would be one piece of advice that you would want to give future leaders that you think would make the most difference besides the beautiful advice that you would give your younger self?
I think for future leaders, particularly for business, because those are the sort of folks I work with, and for people who are, even young people who are graduating and looking for companies to start working with, is that it's not only good business sense to start developing your workforce and doing that early and start seeing your employees as really total people outside of just work, get to know who they are, experience them. That goes as far as even our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that are happening right now. Just who are the people that make up our workforce and who are they and what are their goals and what ideas do that they have is really going to bring greater fulfillment for them, okay? Because they're going to see, oh my God, you actually take an interest in me. And the businesses benefit from just happier, fulfilled employees naturally. So
wow, which is again so different than the advice from generations ago, where they'd be like, don't get to know your employees, they're just employees. There has to be this hard line of it. Well, it didn't work. It clearly
Yeah.
is working if we're shifting.
There's a couple ways to motivate. I say like 3 different ways. So what you're talking about is that really in previous organizational structures and cultures, it's been a fear motivation,
Mhm.
right? Which is like, okay, when the boss is out, party, we'll do everything, and when they come in, it's like, yeah, we're working. Okay. And you don't want to say anything to the boss, and the boss is not really asking, well, how am I how am I doing as a boss, and having upward feedback. And there's none of that, because that person felt like, well, I've got to not be seen as weak maybe, and I'm the final say. The buck stops with me. And then you've got, I think there's also a shift of sort of, I would say, promoting people or giving gifts and rewards. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm also saying that there's a tendency to happen where people sort of expect that to be the case. And so, yeah, that doesn't really work either. So in both those cases, those are just temporary band-aids, if you will, to motivate people. And what really gets people motivated is attitude motivation, right? Really looking at their behaviors, because it's like, you can give a man a fish, right? Or teach a man a fish. Which one is really going to be able to sustain them? So if you're developing not only their personal and professional attitudes, behaviors, you're going to help that person not just for the right now, but go on. And as they go on in their career.
I am obsessed with that last part of like attitude, motivation. Do you talk about this in the book?
So we touch on it a little bit, but we really do it in our sort of coaching and facilitation programs that we run as well. And people, because, it's hard to hear. People are like, why? Like, my attitude's great. I don't have any.
Yeah.
And then you really start to unpack, well, why haven't you achieved what you say that you wanted? And it's like, well, because of this, because of that, because of that. Well, then let's go back. And so it's not an overnight thing, right? And people have to be open to it. And it does take time. But if you're willing to work on it and to change your behaviors, once you change them, like I said earlier, once you learn it, it's really hard to unlearn it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of courage to be willing to say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of courage in that.
Wonderful. If people want to get in touch with you to learn more about the coaching, and I highly suggest everyone to do it because the attitude shift is really, really huge. How can they do so?
Yeah, so the best way to connect with me, and I'd love to connect with people if you've got questions or just to have a conversation, I just really love to learn more about people, is probably LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best way. I kind of, if I'm not working, I'm on LinkedIn. And that's just at my name. And then I'm happy if you do, I don't know if you do show notes, to put the website of the book in the show notes and give that to you as well.
Definitely. Thank you so, so much. It's honestly been such a wonderful conversation. I mean, I had intended for us to talk about other things, but this one it came, and I think it was the message that was meant to be manifested right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to your listeners for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Speak soon. Thank you for joining us this week on Minutes on Growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, then make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now.